I thought if you told people facts, they'd draw their conclusions. And because the facts were true, the conclusions mostly would be too. But we don't run on facts, we run on stories, about things, about people.
El podcast Interplanetario. La exploración del espacio en beneficio de toda la humanidad. Sus anfitriones en Inglaterra y los Países Bajos, Matt Russell y Julio Aprea.
Oh yeah, baby James S.A. Corey.
Well, actually, that person does not exist, Matt.
I did not know this.
This is a pseudonym, and the real authors of The Expanse are Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank.
If I'm really honest, I didn't really know that the books came first.
Have you read the books?
No, you're going to take the mickey at me now. I have not read the books. I've only seen the TV
I read the books. I read the books before the show came out. I was there before they became cool, you know.
But I just want to point this out. The Expanse has never been cool. It's a great show.
It's the coolest sci-fi show out there. Maybe For All Mankind gets there too.
Yeah, I've just started, as you know.
Battlestar Galactica. But.
As you know, I've only just started watching For All Mankind. I do think For All Mankind's really, really excellent. After the disappointment,
it's just spectacular.
Yeah, after the disappointment of some of the other space things, like don't get me started on Stowaway.
I haven't watched it yet.
I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I found it pretty really irritating and disappointing and just totally unbelievable. So
okay, but we started the show running in a way.
Yeah, we did.
Right,
we did a bit.
I think For All Mankind, once you are caught up to speed, I think it would be really cool to do an episode of the historical parallels between the show itself and what really happened in our timeline.
It might even be interesting to explore other timelines, a third timeline. Yeah,
that would work really well for a short show.
A bit like in The Man in the High Castle when there's other timelines on the films.
I have not watched that one, and please don't spoil it. By the way, let's warn the audience that today we are going to be talking about the science of The Expanse, the TV show for you, the books for me. I also watched the TV show. I love it. We will not be going through the storyline bit by bit. We're not going to spoil the whole thing, but we are going to mention a few things here and there that could be considered spoilers at some point. So for those that really want to stay away from that,
switch off now.
Switch off now for the next hour and a half.
Don't switch off just yet, because before we start our breakdown of The Expanse, I think we should congratulate China, just because
definitely
I think that's huge. China have landed on Mars successfully, and if that's not big news, I don't know what is, because they're the second nation ever to really achieve that. Successfully, yeah. I mean, You've had the Russians who did it first, and transmitted a photo, but the photo was totally useless, and then it broke. So we can't really count that. And obviously, we did a big, long rundown of Russia's really quite woeful. I think they've been very unlucky, actually, the Russians with Mars. Of course, we've got the terribly distressing British landing, where it worked but didn't quite. And then, of course, you've got the European one with the old Schiaparelli doing a bit of litho breaking straight into the surface.
Yes, I was in a meeting when that happened.
Oh.
It was interesting to see the development in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet it was. But no, the Chinese have achieved it, and that is no mean feat. It's massive as well.
It's about time. It's about time to have more countries in Mars.
It's a big old thing as well that they managed to get down onto the surface. It's not like a sort of small robotic stuff. It's a lander with a rover on board, and the rover's almost 6 foot tall. It's like
that's about 180, 185.
185, yeah.
That's my height. Wow, but it has a mass of 240 kilos. That's not my mass. It's a little bit chunky.
A little bit chunkier than a Julio
on the BMI.
Yeah, but it's big, isn't it? That's just the rover, which was recently named Le Zhurong, a mytho-historical figure associated with fire and light. and is meant to ignite the fire of interstellar exploration in China and to symbolize the Chinese people's determination to explore the stars and to uncover unknowns in the universe. Some people might say to venture into the expanse.
Yeah, we have talked in the past about how cool the names the Chinese choose.
I love the Chinese names
and the celestial castles and these sort of things. Zhurong sounds like Mercury in the Greek or the Roman pantheon?
Like the equivalent of Apollo, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know, Zhurong, but yeah, the actual rover is set to go on a little excursion probably in the next week, which will be very exciting, wouldn't it?
It's been quite a year for Mars.
Yep, a massive year for Mars, massive year for China. So congratulations, China.
Let's go into the Expanse.
Let's go on to the Expanse. So
they also have some human rights issues in the Expanse.
They definitely
we might mention some of them.
Well, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I like talking about it, because I think the Expanse, like a lot of science fiction, like if you take Jules Verne and things like Arthur C. Clarke and all those the sci-fi greats, they actually bring up problems before they happen. So they actually sort of say, well, if this happens, then we've got to start thinking about this. And if this happens, we've got to start thinking about this. And so the sci-fi writers in writing this stuff kind of flag up that we might have problems further down the line, or also flag up what our future might look like to kind of keep us going.
Always these sci-fi authors think about possible scenarios in the future. They are always very heavily influenced by the situation at the time of their writing. Okay, you can think maybe not so much space related, but H.G. Wells with the shape of things to come as well, things of the future based on what he lived through the world wars or the political environment in the UK at that time. Or 1984, Big Brother. Anyway, they tend to think either in utopias or nightmare scenarios as well, dystopian futures, and sometimes they act as encouragement, inspiration, and sometimes they act as a warning. And I think in both cases it's very valuable work from science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, H.G. Wells is obviously, well, it's just an absolute classic, isn't he, really? Yeah, born in Kent, if you want to know, and went to Imperial College, just like Brian May and Helen Sharman. There we go.
What are the odds? By the way, you mentioned Jules Verne. What do you think of the Jules Verne Spaceport or Jules Verne Space Center?
I think that's actually so good. The Guiana Space Center should be called the Jules Verne Spaceport. That I think it should be an interplanetary campaign.
I think there's a case. We are calling it Europe Spaceport at the moment, or Guiana Spaceport, or Space Center, and I think it would be very inspiring to rename it to something like
Jules Verne Spaceport is Spaceport. Brilliant.
Yeah,
I love that.
He's French, right?
Yep.
And again, I had to check. Maybe he was from some
Belgium,
French colony. Yeah. I think it would be a really good name. And worldwide, I mean, most science fiction authors are heavily influencing figures of today, like Jeff Bezos, were inspired by Jules Verne.
Well, it has to be said. I mean, anyone that's in science or in things like, you know, making rocket ships or looking at the stars, almost certainly, like 90% of them have been influenced by sci-fi writers, right? And people like Jules Verne and Heinlein and people like that.
I have to say, I have sometimes met people that work in space industry and have no background on sci-fi, no background on Star Trek, Star Wars, any of that. Before joining this industry, I always thought that we were all going to be a bunch of space nerds. Yeah. But no, it's surprising how many reasonable people, normal people, we have highly competent normal people are working in the space industry that really have no interest on sci-fi.
It's like that weird time where you talk to someone and they confess that they've never seen Star Wars. That always gets me. But anyway, The Expanse. What I think The Expanse is a little bit like Jules Verne. So when Jules Verne was writing, he was writing about a kind of near future, wasn't he? He was writing about something that was feasible within 100 years, and
within a lifetime.
Yeah. So yes. It was looking. You could see that the march of time towards it, and I think The Expanse is a kind of what we call hard sci-fi, isn't it? Where it's sci-fi, but it tries to get the physics reasonably right. Even though, and I totally think this, that any fiction should be about telling a story and talking about human emotions and things. And so you shouldn't let the science get in the way.
Well, I agree on you on that, but at the same time, that science and technology available are the tools that you have in order to tell the story. Because if you can just invent anything for convenience, then it's just magic. And then you end up with Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, Star Wars is completely an alternate timeline, isn't it? It's not even, doesn't even need to be humans.
In another galaxy a long time ago.
And essentially the same with Star Trek is so far down the road that they can do things like transportation, the teleport and faster than light travel and warp drives and things like this, which are just things to help the story get pushed along. And you just have to just say it's magic.
Yet Star Trek is a couple of hundreds of years into the future. There is a timeline behind that. But yes, it looks highly optimistic.
Yes, it looks wildly
highly optimistic now, with the. I wonder if they had some physics advisor.
I think that says a lot. Don't you think that says a lot that in the 60s, I think that Star Trek probably didn't seem that unfeasible. I mean, there's certain things like teleportation and warp drive that probably seemed like, they're obviously storytelling things. Mm-hmm. But to think that in, say, 200 or 300 years, man might be out going into the galaxy in starships didn't seem that ridiculous, because they'd made so much progress from the Wright brothers to Saturn V. And you think,
I'm currently reading a book on just space exploration history, the real history, okay? The Penguin Book of Space Exploration by John Loxton. He's a very renowned space historian. This whole recount of official documents from the 60s all the way to the 80s on the decisions that shaped space exploration of the US. And in some cases, they are talking about just after Apollo 11, and this is like memos from the president or recordings and things like that. And they are talking about scenarios of going to Mars and landing in Mars in the early 80s. So they really thought that this was possible.
I think we should get onto one of the reasons why it hasn't been, because
politics.
Well, politics is one, but I do think that there has been a roadblock in terms of propulsion, in terms of the fact that the way that rockets work hasn't changed. There's been absolutely no massive breakthrough there at all. In fact, Saturn V is still the biggest and most powerful rocket by miles that's ever flown off the surface of Earth. And it's now, 55 years old, and it's still...
You could say that reusability currently could be the biggest breakthrough to rocket propulsion, or not rocket propulsion itself, but rocket transport, chemical propulsion-based transport operations.
But you could say that that's what they were saying in the 70s when they were designing the space shuttle.
Yes, but the space shuttle did not deliver the reusability that they were expecting.
No.
They were talking about a launch a week, and then you ended up, well, in some cases more, in some specific years, up to, I think, 6 launches. But normally you would get, 4 launches of space shuttle per year, around that?
Yeah, I mean, it just didn't quite work, did it? And
with 4 launches per year, you don't get the economics of reusability ongoing.
No. But don't you think that that's the roadblock? In other words, in the 80s, they thought, in the 70s, they're sort of going, all this is moving forward. We're going from Saturn V to the space shuttle. And when you look at Saturn V and then you look at the space shuttle looks so futuristic compared to it. And
they had an alternative development to the space shuttle, but more for cargo, that was based on nuclear propulsion. They were looking into developing a rocket with nuclear propulsion. I just can't recall the name now.
Well, of course.
So that could be another scenario.
Yeah, well, nuclear propulsion, we should talk about that because that is something that the Expanse seems to do. One of the things that they have is this thing called, what's it called? The Epstein drive.
Epstein drive. The Expanse, at the beginning, the book, it's a keystone. It lives and dies by the existence of the Epstein drive. According to the books, before the Epstein drive, basically chemical-based propulsion was more or less what we have today. Okay, so the same tyranny of the rocket equation, needing a lot of mass to move a lot of mass, and I don't know if you want to explain that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes back to a couple of Newton's laws of motion, doesn't it? All rocket propulsion is essentially, if you've got nothing to push against, which you don't when you're up in the air or out in space, you have to be pushing something behind you so that there's an equal force pushing you forwards, right? I don't know if that's probably the best way of saying it, but it's the second and third laws of motion of Isaac Newton.
The basic of propulsion,
yeah.
Yes. And you push yourself forward by pushing something else backwards.
And, of course, Tsiolkovsky noticed the horrible thing about that is that you need fuel and you need the stuff to chuck out the back. And therefore, if you're carrying that,
to carry it with you.
You need to then have fuel to carry that. And then you need to have fuel that carries that. So something like Saturn V weighed 3,000 tons on the launch pad to get 50 tons to the moon. So barely 1.5% of the mass of the original rocket is actually usable mass. And what I found, this is the bit that I absolutely love. If the Earth was a little bit bigger, chemical propulsion would start to become completely impractical. So if the world was just a little bit bigger, Saturn V wouldn't work. You'd have to have more stages. And if it gets to if you get to 10G, this is my favorite. If you get to 10G, you start to have to use a sizable fraction of the mass of the planet itself to get off the planet. which I think is absolutely hilarious. In other words,
but then again, had the Earth been a little bit less massive, it would be so easy.
Imagine if we would
like Mars.
Like Mars. If Mars had sort of had an atmosphere and life had started there, God, it'd be so much easier, wouldn't it?
Well, if we could terraform Mars, then getting out of Mars would be rather easy.
Yeah. I mean, how easy?
Which again, the Expanse are working on terraforming. We should
we'll get to terraform.
But let's focus right now on the Epstein.
So
drive.
the Epstein drive. It seems to be that this from the episode that I saw where it gets switched off by the ring, which is another completely different thing. But that
we will not. I think the ring.
Let's stay away from.
Let's not go into the ring. Let's stay away from the ring because that is the magic item.
That is the magic item that opens up interstellar travel. But the Epstein drive really is just there so that you can zip around the solar system reasonably fast without currently we're stuck with a 6-month journey to Mars, and that would definitely ruin the storylines in the Expanse, right? So you have to have a much faster rocket ship. So it looks like it's nuclear propulsion, or the type of nuclear propulsion that is confinement pellets that are confined and set off like little hydrogen bombs, tiny pellets that essentially become hydrogen bombs. All of that energy is sent out of a nozzle, like a torch, this bright light out the back of this rocket, and you're getting quite a bit of thrust.
Yeah. A very, very good specific impulse.
Very good specific impulse.
The community has made some estimations of the specific impulse of this drive. It seems to be between 1.1 million seconds to 1.93 million seconds for the Rocinante, the main spaceship in the show. And just for reference, the HM7B, which is the engine that we use on the upper stage of Ariane 5, is around 440 seconds. 440 compared to almost 2 million. And 440 is kind of considered on the high side for chemical propulsion.
Yes,
okay.
Good.
Of course, you have also some electric propulsion engines.
But they're only in the thousands, aren't they?
Some of them can go as high as to 20,000 seconds. Again, far lower. And of course, they do not. They are not. They cannot be used. Their thrust is not such that you can use it to escape Earth's gravity. Electric propulsion drives are awesome for constant propulsion, very economical propulsion. While once you are in space, but we can see these massive spaceships from the Expanse. Some of them are what they call as atmospheric types that can go in and out of the atmosphere, and they are still using the Epstein drive. So we can say that the Epstein drive has incredible efficiency, but also sufficient thrust to escape Earth gravity.
Yeah, well, the thrust is roughly equivalent to the thrust of a Saturn V, wasn't it? The F1 engine. If the Epstein drive, that Solomon Epstein, the fictional character, when he invents it, he actually dies in the invention because the ship takes him on a 7G acceleration for 37 hours, and he gets to 5% of the speed of light and dies in the process, obviously. And
then has no more fuel to flip and burn and turn back.
He's done for anyway, isn't he? 7G's going all the time, which we'll get onto in a minute, because 7G's, it's not the best for you. But so if you have pellets, and the sort of the sci-fi trope is normally pellets of helium-3, isn't it? Because helium-3 has a special type of fusion that means it doesn't create many neutrons. And neutrons are a bit of a problem because they're not charged particles. You can't use magnetic fields to accelerate them out in the right direction, so they just fly off in all different places.
Because that is one of the principles as well of electric propulsion, the use of electrically charged particles accelerated with magnetic fields. This is why you can have such a small mass accelerated to sometimes relativistic speeds.
Yeah. Well, it's all about exhaust velocity, isn't it? It's how fast you can get your exhaust affects your specific impulse being a measurement of efficiency, a bit like miles per gallons in a car. But the way I sort of saw this is, because you need so much power, this is like this spaceship would have been flying with something like 35 terawatts of energy into this drive. Now, just to put that into perspective, the whole of the UK runs on 35 gigawatts. That's 1,000 times less energy than this one ship was using for this flight. Now, imagine you're in a car and petrol obviously is burnt really efficiently and turned into forward motion, like actually quite efficiently. Now, the inefficiencies of that process heat the engine up, and you have to have water cooling and air cooling and everything else to keep the engine cool. So always a percentage of the energy that you're using gets converted into heat or is really annoying, basically. You've got to do something with that energy. So the moment you have 35 terawatts of energy, even if your process is wildly efficient, there's still so much energy kicking around that it's almost certainly going to destroy your spaceship.
Well, it's physics. You cannot have a perfect transformation of energy. No. Some of it will generate heat, and that heat needs to be dissipated. So at these levels, that's a lot of heat. You need to be dissipating. But also, you were talking about the amount of energy that you need to run this drive. Again, another characteristic of electric propulsion is that you also need really a lot of power to run these drives, and this is why spacecrafts that use electric propulsion need to have especially big or especially efficient solar panels. I don't see many solar panels in the Expanse. I mean, these ships would have to look like Rosetta in a way too.
Yeah, but actually they may not need the solar panels because they may be getting the energy from the nuclear material itself, mightn't they? So that, like, the pellet generates the power required to chuck itself out the back at these very high
with the explosion.
So you're getting the double whammy with nuclear fuels, and I think that's why, there is a movement, isn't there, right now to sort of re-explore nuclear propulsion. Blue Origin have just won a contract from NASA to do precisely that. The UK Space Agency have been talking about it recently. So nuclear propulsion, I think, is back on the cards precisely because of all these things that you get out of it. But when you look at designs by people like the British Interplanetary Society for these nuclear fusion drives to do interstellar travel, these spacecraft are absolutely huge, and most of it are radiating panels to radiate this waste heat away. There's a technology in the Expanse that we're not being made aware of, in other words.
Technically, it's not an impossible drive.
No, it's not impossible. No.
It does not, in theory, you should not break the laws of physics.
No. It's just, is it practical?
I don't know if we will ever get to something like this, or maybe there will be another different breakthrough. But okay, what is your take on the realism of this engine?
For the storyline, it's got to be a 10 out of 10, isn't it? Basically, without it, we don't have this community that are able to sort of zip around the solar system, right? As in, it's
and there are a few
essential.
other consequences from it that I'll mention in a moment, but
just the fact that we're talking about these absolutely huge numbers, it seems to be based on nuclear fusion technology. When you start looking at the numbers, it doesn't look feasible, does it? That there would have to be a remarkable breakthrough and control. Not to say that that's not going to happen. But
okay, Matt, but you're a man that is known for taking certain bets on eating certain things in case some things happen or not on a certain timeline. Tell me, do you think something with the characteristics of the Epstein drive could happen in the next, 300 years? What do you think are the chances of that?
I think maybe 300 years. Yeah, I think so, actually. Thinking about it, in 300 years, yeah. I mean, we're talking from the sailboat to the Saturn V, aren't we? Timeline. But it would require new physics. It would require an entirely new invention. What do you think?
It's a science fiction drive. I was just testing you. I wanted to see if in 300 years, if it doesn't exist, what you can offer to eat. What book will you eat in 300 years if it doesn't happen? Because we will all be around in 300 years, thanks to the biological developments of the Expanse.
Well, potentially.
But anyway, going back to the Epstein drive, because it's thanks to the Epstein drive enables a few things that are quite important for the storyline of the books. It helps with certain other technological limitations of space travel. When you have an engine that is so efficient like the Epstein drive, you can pretty much run it constantly. If you run the engine constantly, you can be constantly accelerating. And what happens if you're constantly accelerating? You are generating artificial gravity. So many of the space operations within the Expanse use the maneuver, the type of travel in which when you travel somewhere, you constantly accelerate up to the middle point. When you reach that middle point, you flip the spaceship around and burn in the opposite direction for braking, but that is also generating artificial gravity inside the ship. This is also why I'm totally fine when watching this show and people are just walking around in the spaceship, because that is a feasible type of travel that you can do. On top of that, of course, they have they don't mention it much in the show, but they use magnetic boots so that if the engine shuts down unexpectedly, they don't just all go floating around.
Yeah, they make a lot of noise, don't they, the magnetic boots in the Expanse in the TV series. So they're continually clinking around.
It's a lot of effort to walk around as well. You can see how they get exhausted by walking with the magnetic
what I like about that is there's obviously a sensor that looks at your leg about when you're about to pull your foot off the ground, because the little red light goes off. So presumably it's an electromagnet that keeps going on and off, so that when you pull your leg off, you're not actually, when you lift your foot.
Yeah, otherwise as you are in the middle of the step, you would have the force pulling you down. But okay, that is regarding artificial gravity.
The one thing that a fighter pilot can do, for example, is sustain high Gs, as in when they're turning, you obviously feel gravity, like you've just explained, and you can go up to pretty high Gs as a fighter pilot if you've trained, but not for very long. You can only do it for a few.
Not for everyone.
Yeah, and you can only do it for a few seconds. If you're doing it for an hour, it's highly likely you're going to get a stroke, or, you know, that the blood isn't getting to your brain properly, isn't getting to certain organs properly, and you almost certainly will die.
Yes.
So,
and when we were talking about the space travel with the flip and burn, we were talking about, in the books at least, they don't even go up to a full G. Sometimes like a third of G is considered sufficient to. It's more or less what we consider, that it still can cover the physiological effect of gravity. However, if you have to make an evasive maneuver because you're about to be shot by a torpedo or in warfare within the Expanse, yes, indeed, you have to do some burns that can reach these multiple Gs. And what do they do for that?
So, yes, I actually really like this idea, and I actually think that there's some legs to it. I think that, and they have this injection called the juice, which is essentially to help them with long-term acceleration. So if you have to intercept another spacecraft, you can pull like 7 Gs for a couple of hours or a couple of days in some cases, isn't it, in the books, I believe. But this juice actually means that you can physiologically cope with that maneuver. Now, I don't think it's...
And crash couches as well.
Yeah, so crash couches and presumably the spacesuits themselves. So just as a fighter pilot, fighter pilots do actually have flight suits that squeeze their entire bodies to offset the G-forces. And obviously that helps a little bit, but it can only go so far because you've got air in your lungs and you've got little pockets of air all around your body in various places. Yeah. And of course that would mean you're in severe trouble because it's all about kind of changes of density, isn't it? So you can be suspended in gel is one way of doing it. But I think the approach of this juice must be to fill all the parts of your body with some kind of nutrient-rich and oxygen-rich gel that means that the oxygen's getting to all the parts of your body for extended periods of time.
In the Expanse, they have much more advanced medicine.
Yeah.
Than we obviously it's expected is in the future. Radiation is another big problem that we have in for our own space travel. We know that one of the biggest risks going to Mars will be the exposure to the radiation along the way. And another medical advancement they seem to have is very, very good radiation treatment. It's just at the beginning of the show, one of the characters, Holden, there is an incident I will not spoil what the incident is about, but in the Eros asteroid, and he gets very, very exposed to lethal doses of radiation, and then they can just treat that. And he has to be on medication for the rest of his life, but he's fine.
Yeah, I mean, there is some precedent for that. As in, with radiation, potentially, humans have genetic responses to radiation exposure that helps the body repair itself after radiation damage. Otherwise, we'd be just getting cancer all the time, or because, you know, we all get radiation damage all the time from sunburn to everything else. So there are some,
but not at the levels that Holden got in Eros.
Yeah, obviously you get.
He would have been dead in weeks or months.
But certain populations have been spotted. So, for example, in Britain, in Cornwall, in fact, where I live here, we get exposed to quite high levels of radon because of the granite rock. And you would expect the population, therefore, to have slightly higher rates of cancer. And it looks like that it's quite the reverse, that maybe the low-level low-level radiation is actually switching on a gene response, which is
the repairing mechanism.
A repairing mechanism, which kind of brings me onto this whole idea of epigenetics, which I've not seen talked about a lot with the Expanse, because I was trying to do a bit of research on it yesterday, and because obviously we see the Belters, and the Belters, just for anyone who hasn't seen the Expanse, they're a group of people that live in the asteroid belt.
The books start with a world a few hundred years in the future, in which the exploration of the solar system has happened, and there has been a development of certain different factions. You have certainly people on Earth, you have people on Mars, that they are trying to terraform Mars, and then you have the Belters. The Belters are sort of this generalization of everyone else. People living on spaceships, people living in asteroids, even people living in Ganymede, for instance, one of Jupiter's moons. And this is all considered to be the Belters. So basically, it's this bag of everyone else. And of course, you cannot generalize that. And so within that faction, there will be other factions. Because the show is about the future, but this is clearly a criticism, or at least a parallel with our world in terms of politics. Okay, you have the old planet, the Earth, ruled by the UN, which, come on, I think that's the most unrealistic part of the world of the book, is that the UN could govern the whole planet. But that is sort of like the old world. That's Europe. Then you have Mars, which is a relatively young planet in terms of having people in it. These people have a common project to colonize Mars, and they have become at some point independent from Earth, and they have become super militaristic. That's clearly the US, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the Belt, which are all these parallels with colonialism. The Belters, many Belters have a very thick Afrikaans accent from South Africa. And so you can see that they are trying to do a parallel either with like African colonies or South American colonies. And you have this whole thing going on that the hard relationship between the old world or Mars in this case, trying to keep control of the Belters, because of course they need the resources. So it's colonialism 101. Just keep the bare minimum for the population there that are giving you the resources, exploit them as much as you can, and not care for them. That's the premise of the book.
Yeah, and
as it happened in our planet 200-300 years ago, right?
Yeah, one of the consequences of being a Belter is that you're born outside of they're now the second generation, third generation, fourth generation people working in the belt, and so they haven't been born in a gravity well. They haven't been born on a large physical body, and that's changed them. So they're taller and thinner. Their bones don't grow properly, so they have to have medicines to keep them going. The Earth can torture them by bringing them back to Earth and keeping them just normally in a cell, and it's like agony for them because they just can't cope with the high gravity.
Some of them cannot even go back to a planet because they have lived all their life in such low gravity that just going to any planet would crush them.
Yeah, and people sort of think of this as evolution, but I don't think it is. I think that would be considered an epigenetic change, as in the phenotype of these Belters is being expressed by the fact that certain genes have been switched on and off by the conditions that they're in. And
certainly, you're talking only about a few generations down the line.
It can't be evolution, can it?
Hundreds of thousands of years you need for actual evolution to diverge. I think we're still talking about one species.
Yeah, and the thing about epigenetic changes that they're not part of evolution. That, as in, it doesn't matter how long these things, because like a baby born in outside of a gravity well, it's really hard to know exactly what changes would happen to that child.
Well, technically the first 9 months you are outside of a gravity well. You are floating in the fluid of your mom's belly.
but you're still.
So I mean, of course, there is gravity, but my point being, we tend to do the parallel of underwater scuba diving as a good way to train for zero gravity environments, and when you're a baby, that's where you are.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, the first few months of postpartum, is that what it's called? Where after birth, the first few months of development is going to be seriously important, and you wonder how many days it would take to be born outside of a gravity well where you could never return. Maybe it's that that your bones would develop in such a way, and your nervous system would develop in such a way, and your heart would develop in such a way that you could never return. So it would be very, very hard to actually tell what would happen to a human child. I mean, here's a question for you, and I've been thinking about this loads today, is when do you think the first human will be born off planet? Off the Earth's surface?
I don't know when, but I can tell you where. Most likely in Mars.
I think the moon would be safer, wouldn't it?
But I don't think it's a matter of safety.
Well, yeah, actually, if it was on the moon, they'd get the mother back.
If you're on the moon, you just go back to Earth to give birth.
Yeah.
I mean, like you just go back to Earth. It sounds ridiculous, but we're talking about science fiction, right? And I know cases of moms that are expatriates living in country X, and to give birth, they decide to go to their home country because of many causes, many reasons, being close to the family, knowing better the healthcare system or whatever. So if you're a mom on the moon, I guess you would just go back, right? But if you're in Mars, we're talking already
there's no way, is there?
Multiplanetary species. Although if you send a mixed crew, and you have all these 6 months of travel, which are incredibly boring, you better have some good
in-flight entertainment.
No, I mean the entertainment will be there, but contraception. I was anti-conception because that's more of the Spanish translation, but of course it's contraception. That's what is going to happen.
Yeah, but how far away do you think that is? And do you actually think, without futuristic medical intervention, actually give birth on Mars?
You're assuming you're in Mars in some sort of base or dome or whatever. So why not? I mean, what would be so bad about giving birth on Mars? If there is a society there, or at least if you have the first few colonists, it's just a matter of time. The people are not going to stop having babies because they are on Mars. They are making a new living, a new life. They want to be there. They're going to have a family.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that will come sooner than we think. And it will be an extraordinary moment, because that change, growing up in a low gravity environment from birth, is undoubtedly going to have profound changes.
And it's not something, for ethics reasons, it's not something you can actually test.
No, and it's, we don't know what will happen.
But let me go back a little bit, because I think this is a good connection. We were talking earlier today about the artificial gravity of the Epstein drive. But of course, the show and the book uses other types of artificial gravity, rotational speed, of course. I mean, there's one massive ship called the Naubo, then becomes, well, I mean, if I tell you the other names later on, it's a spoiler. But the Naubo, which is there is this one generation ship commissioned by the Mormons, because I don't know where they want to go. They want to load it up and go. In the end, it's not used for that, but it has a internal habitat, that the drum that can be spun up, and they have artificial gravity there. But on top of that, they also have belters living in certain asteroids, like Eros or Ceres. Ceres? How do you say it?
Ceres, yeah.
Ceres. And the way they live in these asteroids is that they have hollowed them. They live inside the asteroids, and they have, again, spun around the asteroids to generate some sort of artificial gravity inside it. So basically, if you are living inside the asteroid, your feet are pointing towards the skin of the asteroid, towards the outside. This also generates the situation in which the closer you are to the skin of the asteroid, the less you are going to feel the Coriolis force, the more you're going to feel the gravity because of the speed you can achieve, the rotational speed and the tangential speed you have there. So you can call that better quality gravity.
Oh, I see where you're going.
So the people living closer to the outside of the asteroid, this is prime real estate. So this is the rich people, tend to be government people, and the yeah.
There's a real
no, but wait, then it's very hard for me to get to the point today, and we wanted to keep it short. But then people are living all around the asteroid, and the poor people, the cheapest real estate is close to the center where you have the least gravity. So you have the poorest kids growing up in the worst conditions, not only as usual in terms of nutrition or access to education, but in terms of access to gravity and the medicines as well to help you develop in this environment. So there is this whole strata of I don't know if to call it a caste system, but there is certainly different social levels within the belters, and depending on where you grow and what you have access to.
Yeah, I mean, all those social aspects are really, really cool, and of course they take their cues from Earth, don't they? There's a really cool scene, isn't there, in one of the episodes where someone's pouring a drink, and they manage to get the Coriolis effect in, where the where the kind of drink does a dog leg into the glass. It's quite good.
Yeah, and you can see that he has some practice doing that already.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wonder how long it would take you to get used to certain things. I mean, that differential gravity is the worst, where parts of your body are feeling it more than others, would just be awful, wouldn't it, all the time?
But we are feeling it all the time.
Well, yeah, but the but the gradient's not quite, as bad as it.
I know what you mean. Oh, just pulling your leg. Okay, different.
Well, I just wanted to bring up
biology.
One technology that I did think in the last few years, this thing has become massive. Obviously, CRISPR-Cas9 in particular is this gene editing technology that won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for 2020 for a start off. It's that important. But I would consider it one of the most important developments of our lifetime. But recently there's been a further development of it where they can switch off these epigenetic genes and switch them on and off using this CRISPR on-off switch. There's quite a lot of hope or thought that these kind of techniques, these CRISPR genetic engineering techniques, if we're really serious about space travel and living in the belt and living on Mars, I think it's the sort of stuff where we would have to seriously think about genetically engineering people to do it. And the technology actually exists to do that.
So you have done an episode recently with Harriet and Jenna. Mm-hmm. You talked about all these different organizations. I thought that's funny because I was part of Space Generation back in the day and did some work there. I didn't even realize that Harriet was. When I was young, now I'm 41. I did that in my mid-20s, early 20s. Anyway, and also the International Space University. And you know that I did the master's at the International Space University, and I owe the International Space University so much. It basically let me change my career from, I was actually working in the steel manufacturing industry in Argentina, and with the master's I went to the ISU, and then I ended up working for ESA.
And you wouldn't have met me otherwise, so how ace is that?
And that for me is the biggest deal of going to ISU, is that 15 years down the line I got to meet you. That's
glory.
Clearly. No, but part of the master's is you have to do a project at the end in a team, and I chose the project for terraforming. And I recall that one of the possibilities we were talking about, of course, we read the bibliography and we were looking at different studies. One of the ideas as well was to genetically modify humans to have chlorophyll in the skin.
Ooh.
And so green humans that could harness directly the energy of the sun. And now with CRISPR, we can do that.
Well, do you know what's really weird about that is that recently they've discovered these sea slugs that if you chop their heads off, they can carry on living without organs. And they think one of the ways this animal is doing it is using chlorophyll, somehow harnessing plant chlorophyll to keep itself alive, and then it can grow its organs again. How amazing is that? So it's not totally ridiculous. That
not only that, but the idea was as well that with that chlorophyll itself, humans could be the generators of the oxygen that they would have to breathe eventually, and that would help terraform Mars.
Oh wow!
Have all these humans expelling oxygen.
You could have
like plants.
Half the humans as chlorophyll humans and half the humans as mitochondria humans. It'd be absolutely epic.
Yeah, and I'm sure from a societal point of view, there would be no divisions and everyone would look at themselves and consider themselves equals.
And to make it easier, you could genetically modify them to be smaller. So they literally would be little green men from Mars.
That's where it all comes from.
Isn't that's...
This is where it came. Little green men.
Little green men from Mars.
It's a human from the future that traveled back on a time machine.
Which, oh my God.
It all fits together. I think, Matt, if this show never airs and if we die,
we'll know why.
Or if we never existed in the timeline, it's because we have just cracked the code.
That's it. It's your paper where they make chlorophyll men, chlorophyll humans. I like it though.
Little green man.
I think that maybe genetic technologies are more important than propulsion technologies when it comes to humans moving out into the solar system. What do you think?
If we're talking for radiation, yes. If we can modify humans if you could use perfect use of the nutrients, you can also eliminate waste.
Mm-hmm.
No poop to deal with. That's also good, right?
Yeah.
It would affect space travel, but it would affect the whole planet.
Yeah, well, I mean, like imagine if you could genetically modify trees to absorb more carbon. Boom, done. You know, you've saved the planet.
You have to be careful with that. You have to be careful. What if you absorb too much?
Oh, yeah. Genetically modify mosquitoes to give everyone the COVID jab while absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. And that's the deal with mosquitoes. We either wipe them out with a gene drive or we say to them, look, you could do our bidding. And the mosquitoes are bound to take the trade. That's what I say.
What happens when they become sentient?
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, where there's more important things to think about.
Yeah, what could go wrong? Anyway,
we've wandered away from the Expanse. So
yes,
ultimately,
but it's okay. It's fine because today we are talking about science fiction. Yeah,
science fiction. Do you know what? I think the Expanse is really good because it does have that really good balance between good storytelling and actual kind of hard sci-fi physics that keeps geeks like Julio satisfied and me, to be honest. And I think I'd much rather the story be good, and that's why I prefer the original Star Trek to the Star Trek The Next Generation, because sometimes they used to get bogged down in the science. Can I ask a question though? Is Holden as serious as he is in the TV series as in the books? Because that's the only bit. He's a bit miserable, Holden. I want him to be a little bit funnier. In the books,
he's sort of that guy, very intense, very righteous, thinking that he's doing he has all the pressure of the universe on his back, and he always thinks he needs to do the right thing, even when he ends up screwing things up by thinking he's doing the right thing. I have to say that within the book and the show, because I think the casting was brilliant, Amos is my favorite character.
Yeah, and actually I've really enjoyed, because we should mention that the thing about the Expanse is that they decide to go down that exploring extra solar planets, exoplanets, because of this ring, the ring that is alien technology. And so you have that magic that enters the show.
The protomolecule.
I absolutely love the last series where it was more bringing it all back to Earth and developing the characters and seeing some of the, it still didn't abandon its hard sci-fi roots, and you had things like these massive underground prisons and lots of other different things going on. But
the books, this last season that features Amos back on Earth, in the books is 10 times better. 10 times better.
No way.
It's brilliant how they develop that. Indeed, there is also sometimes Holden going back to see his parents. They picture as well the society in Earth has evolved and some different... for instance, Holden is like a kid. So apparently the planet is so overpopulated that there is universal income. Okay, and few people that can work. Most people are on a paycheck because there is not enough work for everyone. At the same time, apparently having kids is an issue because of the overpopulation. So, for instance, I think Holden has like many parents, not only a couple, but many parents. He grows in a communal society. Where they all share the one kid. Crazy, eh?
Yeah, see, it's a weird one, that one, because most of the science about population seems to suggest that we're going to peak pretty soon.
Yeah, but the saying, it takes a village to raise a kid.
Yeah.
Raising kids is a lot of work. I can see the advantage.
I don't know why you say that, Julio.
of taking shifts with another set of parents.
Yeah, raising kids is definitely, particularly at the ones at the age you've got them, Julio. That's it's making me. By the way,
talking about young kids, warfare is another interesting part of the show that they get right, and I have not seen a show that gets this so right, probably since Battlestar Galactica. They also did space battles, pretty good there. But what I like about The Expanse is that the warfare in The Expanse, space battles, are not small X-Wings fighting TIE fighters as if it was just regular dogfights by jet planes, but it's more like naval warfare between big ships and torpedoes and really, really long distances when hitting each other. And I mentioned the torpedoes. They also have rail guns. Basically, just a big mass, really accelerated, really, really fast in certain directions. Even using rocks, just accelerating asteroids and pointing them at something and using that as a weapon.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's
in space, as simple as that.
But that, I mean, that I have to say is one of the most terrifying things about going out into the solar system, is that idea that you could wipe out the Earth by redirecting an asteroid is actually pretty feasible, isn't it? And that is pretty feasible. And the fact that, you can use mass as such a deadly weapon. It's like, and the drive, like we said, a 35 terawatt drive on a warship, having an accident in a spacecraft like that is potentially world destroying. Like whacking that thing into the Earth is going to be a big
launching from the planet.
No,
in this sort of future, I think this sort of show would work better with space elevators to get in and out of the planet, and then spaceships staying in space. That's how they went about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think about interstellar travel.
I don't recall if they have space elevators in the book.
No, I was thinking that when I was thinking about like how do they get out of the gravity well, but there's not space elevators. They've even got, most people have like a personal, like rich people have got personal rockets that get
personal shuttles.
Shuttles, yeah.
in their weekend homes.
Yeah,
that they can just take off. But by the way, I want to go back for a second to the topic of the asteroids, because you think it's terrifying. It's a nightmare scenario of the ability of someone out in space to point an asteroid in our direction.
Big time.
But right now, we are at the mercy of chance, because there could be an asteroid already on the way here, not shot by anyone else, but just by the universe.
Yeah. Well, there definitely will be at some point, right?
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But in the show, in the books, the Earth has an asteroid defense system because, of course, we don't want to end up like the dinosaurs. So that exists, and we're completely spoiling that. But yeah, of course, this system, the anti-asteroid system, has to be sabotaged in order for those asteroids to hit the Earth. And those asteroids are also made stealth using some sort of cover so that they cannot be detected by radar or long distance by telescopes. So they come in stealth and with the disabled asteroid defense system.
Yeah.
I would expect, I would hope that doesn't happen. But certainly this shows that we really need now, and we have certain missions already working on the demonstrations and pre-development of that, of space situation awareness, okay? What's the asteroids are coming, but also to develop the anti-asteroid defense system.
Yeah, I mean, we seem to be quite a long way off that, don't we? Even, and that seems to be a very.
But it's crazy because you're talking about something that could just wipe out society, and we do not get our act together. Yeah. Just look at COVID. Massive failure on the humanity at humanity level. Massive failure of coordination. Yep. Even with an imminent threat like this one, we could not coordinate at a global level.
Yeah,
think about global warming that we know is happening, but is more long term than COVID. We still cannot get together and agree on something. This is why I said that the Expanse, the most science fiction part of it is a United Nations that governs the whole planet. There is no such thing. There is a United Nations, but I don't see that sort of world government happening anytime soon. And that is probably what we need eventually to face these global threats.
Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, I do love it. I do. I think the Expanse is a fully successful program. It's got. I don't know. The only thing I would change about the Expanse is make Holden just slightly more charismatic than he is.
I love that show. But the Expanse, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, all these strong characters are female.
It's got a really good blend of characters. And I don't even want to call that unusual, because I actually think that sci-fi has been doing that for a long time. Back to something like Alien, you'd have to be nuts if you don't distribute your characters amongst the genders, etc., etc. I think
But they have been particularly good at that. Avasarala, she starts as, I think, Undersecretary of the UN, and eventually she takes over, right? That character is just amazing. Where did they come from with that? Like old Indian-looking lady. I'm not talking about the show. I'm talking about the book, right?
Yeah.
And such a foul mouth, and the character, it's brilliant what they did with that character. I think Avasarala is, for me, as much a favorite as Amos. Probably for the same reason, brutal honesty.
My last fact before we close up: the actor that plays Holden, Stephen Strait, was born on the same day as Werner von Braun, March the 23rd. Anyway, Julio, what are you doing this week? What fun and games are you up to?
Work. And actually, now that IKEA reopened,
whoa,
lots of IKEA assembly to do.
Oof.
New house.
Nice.
Yeah. A massive Pax wardrobe, my favorite.
Oh,
That's like backbreaking.
I can honestly say, if I never have to go to IKEA ever again in my life, I'll be a happy man.
What are you planning to do this week?
Oh, edit a podcast, get the podcast out, say hello to all the Spodcats out there. Hi, Spodcats. And get on with doing a few lectures. I've got a bit of lecturing to do. Hopefully, it's going to get a little bit easier now I've got all the marking out of the way. That's what's made my life a misery for the last couple of weeks, is marking. Anyone who's a lecturer or a teacher out there will know that marking is quite simply the worst of times. It's so horrible.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is, honestly, it's quite horrible. And I'd never met a teacher or a lecturer who's said, I really like marking. That is not something you'll ever hear, ever.
I guess this is why multiple choice exams
the beauty.
Enter into existence.
Oh my God. I've been trying desperately to work out a way that I can get GPT-3 to do my marking for me. Anyway, Julio, I'm going to say bye-bye to the Spodcats. Ready?
Okay,
you ready this? Bye-bye, Spodcats!
Bye-bye.